So on to today's session. The story is Freddie Mac, crawl, walk, run, improve IT operations with xMatters. So our speaker, as mentioned, is Mark Streger, who is a 40-year IT veteran who likes to look at every problem as an opportunity. And in his current role, Mark's team manages enterprise tools that are focused on IT service management, automation, and deployment. So I'm going to let Mark share more about his background, but I can tell you that his mantra is to stay relevant and to discover synergies so that his team can do more with less. Probably what many of you are looking to learn about today. Good afternoon to you, Mark. We are very excited to hear the Freddie Mac story and your story. Over to you.
Good afternoon. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Coming to you from Annapolis, Maryland. And a brief history about how we got started with xMatters. And basically, about 2 years ago, this was dumped on my lap. I hadn't heard of xMatters. A director in our organization went to a conference, saw xMatters, and sure enough, we had xMatters. Wasn't live, but we were paying the bill. And the problem was that over the course of the past several years, we moved on to ServiceNow, matured our IT service management capabilities, and now we're looking at how we can rev up incident management. We needed to have a tool that can tie into ServiceNow so that support groups would be pulled along, so that support staff would be pulled along. We needed a tool that can pull information about how to contact people from Workday, as Workday was the system of record for phone numbers, devices. We needed a tool that would be easy to use, that would work reliably all the time, and really something that would be consistent and fun to do, as opposed to something that was going to be arduous, which was what we're doing of maintaining contact information manually on spreadsheets. So we're going to talk about how we got started. We sort of moved along to operate the product at scale. We believe we're achieving excellence now. And I'll give you some conclusions and thoughts and answer your questions. Next slide. So I've been 40 years in IT and have had pretty much every role from a mainframe assembler programmer, CIO, to a manager of an enormous amount of technology now. IT service management includes ServiceNow, includes discovery. I have tools that enforce several of our controls, job scheduling, which does about 2.5 million jobs a month, configuration management, code deployment, server automation, B2B services, which includes file transfers to about 600 or 700 trading partners. I had to throw in my little sailing quip. Since I'm a sailor, the wind is always blowing. That's what sailors believe. It isn't always blowing where you're sailing, but somewhere along the line, the wind is good. I manage a team of 24 staff, and as we said, a pretty diverse portfolio of tools. Next slide. So about Freddie Mac, we're a large organization. We're actually, and we have about 8,000 employees. We're Fortune 10 type organization. We actually have 3 businesses. One is the single family mortgage market. Then we got the multifamily mortgage market, and they're separate and distinct businesses. And then we're also an investment firm. So we got an investment and capital markets division. We are very sensitive to reputational risk, and thus applications have got to be up 24/7. We have people that hit our website to ensure that their mortgage could be improved, to determine the status of various fundings, to file transfers and batch operations that go on 24/7. So we have a large on-call staff. Right now we're over 2,100 people are in xMatters on call. We now have, this is a little old, we now have about 290 support groups supporting over 1,000 applications. And on a typical day, xMatters reaches out to about 150 different support groups or people to get engaged. So it is a tool that's ingrained in our usage on a daily basis. Next slide. So the initial problem was we didn't have a tool we can use to reliably contact support staff. So we needed to onboard a solution that could enable the schedules to be maintained. We wanted something that would make it as easy as possible to manage the rotations, as well as have the notion of escalation. So one person doesn't answer the call, can we escalate to a second person or a third person? We wanted a tool that could enable us to track who got called and what sort of responses were received. We knew we had to integrate with ServiceNow as our support groups are maintained in ServiceNow, the staff and the support groups. We also had to pull information from ServiceNow, which gets phone numbers and contact information from Workday. Initially, we had to integrate with ServiceNow so that when somebody was looking at an incident, they would be able to click a button and engage the appropriate groups from ServiceNow into xMatters. As I said, somebody went out and bought xMatters at a conference, and we started onboarding and integration work. And next slide. So we had the launch. Well, the launch wasn't really happening for a while. Like a lot of tools we onboard get selected by one group who then tries to wash their hands and leave it to somebody else to operationalize the product. And that was me and my team. So we had xMatters. We had tested some of the integration. We knew that we could do it, and eventually we had to launch. At this time, we only had one environment, production. So we made some announcements and picked the date and rolled it out. There was a lot of education we learned we needed to do afterwards because people didn't know how to manage their support groups. People didn't know how to check their devices. Without rosters, everybody in a group was contacted at once. So the DBAs all thought we were crazy when 40 phones went off at once. We didn't have any governance or norms. And when I say that, it's what should the escalation policy be? How should groups be formed? Staff didn't know they were on call or how to respond, and we trained them as well. So we initially ramped up. We didn't know how to even staff this thing. I had about 1.5 people who could spell xMatters, and we, along the way, we'll see we grew the team. Our sync with ServiceNow was troublesome. Initially, it was a bi-weekly sync that was triggered off manually on a scheduled basis. Good part is we were integrated with SAML so that people could go from our intranet into xMatters to configure their devices if they needed to. Next slide. So now we're looking at getting some stability, getting some growth. We realized that we had some gaps we started to address. We were getting less support calls about xMatters. People stopped sending me hate mail. We started ramping up. More and more groups wanted to be onboarded onto xMatters. We knew we had to do some internal policing because we had users who were defined in xMatters but had no phones defined. So we had to do some initial analysis on our end. We trained everybody to answer the phone that was coming from our operations center. We told them to put it in their phone, save it on their mobile device. We did a lot of exploring, writing knowledge base articles, how to provision support groups, how to set up rosters, how to set up users and shift management. We realized we needed a second xMatters test environment to test both ServiceNow upgrades, to test out new forms and features, to do user training, to develop stuff. Initially, we didn't realize that xMatters sort of had a development environment built in, which is Flow Designer. So a lot of it was, we needed to grow a little. We bought some additional licensing. When we initially launched, we had about 1,400 users, but we're ramping up for a while, growing at over 100 users a month till we made it to about 2,200 users. We started out with 100 support groups, grew to about 300 support groups. And I personally built up my team, so basically anybody that supported ServiceNow picked up xMatters as well as another tool in that ITSM incident management space. The next slide. So now we're looking at how can we improve the engagement? How can we improve the way we run the tool? We started off with a dog, and with tools that I manage, we either do two things. We either try to get rid of them, or they become diamonds. And xMatters was slowly becoming a diamond. And along the way, our relationship with xMatters changed a little. We started having bi-weekly meetings with our account team and a customer success management individual from xMatters. We got a new ServiceNow plugin which enabled dynamic sync. So when we upgraded ServiceNow, we upgraded this sync process. So now we didn't have to wait 3 days for users to be defined into xMatters. That happened dynamically. Out of left field, MS Teams came on strong. So xMatters had an MS Teams bot, and our incident management moved all of the way they engage from a form inside of ServiceNow to using the xMatters bot. And that became very big as incident management, the operations center, live in Teams now and use that bot to bring people, bring support groups into those Teams channels. We added some reporting, because reporting, every organization reports a little differently. There was some pretty basic reports in xMatters. We took a plugin, we started sending data to Splunk to build a dashboard. We used another piece of code to push on-call rosters to a Teams channel. We still want to do more, but xMatters became a de facto tool. Nobody started doubting it. We started also hosting monthly open houses. My team has a 2-hour session scheduled once a month where anybody can show up virtually, of course, and have us look at their xMatters rosters, look at problems they're having with xMatters, maybe run some ideas or usage patterns against us. We've had users come to us with custom requests that way. Any kind of training they want, we now provide on a monthly basis. The next slide. So we started looking at other things we needed to productionalize the product. We started taking nightly backups. We took a script from xMatters, and it creates a snapshot of the current roster configuration we save on disk. And that proved to be really good, because we unfortunately shot ourselves in the foot once and lost all our data, and we were able to work with xMatters technical support to use the backup to restore our online data. And that was remarkable, because it was right before weekend, and I thought I'd start getting hate mail again, and nobody even noticed we really lost the data and resurrected it. We create monthly reports to highlight offenders, people who don't answer their phone. A lot of times if they don't answer the phone, that may be that they don't know xMatters is calling them. They have the wrong phone number defined in the system that xMatters is using. Could be a variety of things. Or somebody could just be told that you're on call and you need to pick up the phone. Can identify groups that get the most calls and see if their volume has gone up or down and why. We're looking, at this time, we also looked at additional use cases. We onboarded disaster recovery as an example. So when we have a disaster recovery exercise, or it could be real, the team wants to engage all of the support staff in remote locations to get on a bridge line for like 5 days to bring up our DR environment and run the test cases. xMatters is used for that. Our application support teams are now using xMatters for cases when applications might be running in a degraded mode. So aside from incident management being called for total failures, now application support is using it to engage their technical SMEs when a problem's detected. All good stuff. And here's an example of our Splunk dashboard where we're looking at events over time, the top support groups, the average time to respond, and that's great. 1.1 minutes. So it's a minute, 6 seconds for the average response time, which is generally good. I mean, if you call somebody, typically there's a fire. You want somebody to come to your house and put that fire out quickly. And that's, one way how we view xMatters. That's the tool we use to call the fire station. The next slide. And here's an example of the xMatters Teams bot. So the team, and this bot is something we're able to get from xMatters, plug into Teams. It enables us to find support groups, to actually invite somebody or a person or a support group to the channel. And this is probably the most widely used bot we have in place in Teams today. This has just become a de facto standard for something that we weren't even considering or using 6 to 8 months ago. This is pretty good. Next slide. And here you can say find, all my groups start with tools ops, and I can say I have 8 groups, and then I can pick which group I want xMatters to work with. Next slide. So let's talk about even doing more with xMatters. How can we even get faster? Can we sprint? What else do we want to do? The next slide. We now have some groups that are engaging engaging xMatters via a REST API. And that was something, it was very useful to have a test and development environment, but here we're now having monitoring tools engage xMatters directly via that API call. And the advantage is we've eliminated the middleman, which is the operations center, or eliminated incident management. So folks may want to know if something happens in their application or certain thresholds triggered, and we can do it automatically in engagement via xMatters. Governance, we're still struggling. That was probably the reason we struggle is upper management never said what the standards should be. If our CIO said everybody's got to pick up the phone in 5 minutes, that would happen. So we have pretty much 2 different escalation patterns now. 0 for the primary person, 5 minutes later for the secondary, 10 minutes for the tertiary, or sometimes we see 0, 10, 20, 30. And they both work, though, in one case it may take 20 minutes if the first 2 people aren't available to answer the phone. We started creating super groups, which are nested groups to support major incidents. So if we know a significant application is down, which we call generally a P2 application, we know we're going to need the same 5 or 10 support groups on the phone immediately. So instead of paging them out one at a time, we created a group that's going to pull in the network support group. It's going to pull in the security team. It's going to pull in the AD group. We still don't have directors and leaders involved with xMatters. They may be ducking that, but for the most part. And it's funny because if there's a problem, they all want to be contacted manually, but not automatically. We'll look to change that. We initially deferred mobile, and that was because of company-owned devices and corporate control devices, but as we're moving towards more bring your own device, we're revisiting that. Reporting and analytics, it's all good, and xMatters has done a significant uplift over time to improve what data is there and how to get at it. A typical use case, you get somebody who says, I never got contacted. And you got the operations center saying, this guy never picked up the phone. And xMatters gives you the ability to go into the data and say, what number did we try to contact with him? Did we get a response? Is his phone just going to busy? So you can get as detailed as you want to solve those problems, and that's good. The next slide. So the conclusion, one of the things is xMatters does a lot of things. It's definitely like the Leatherman. It can slice and dice, it can be pliers, it can be a programming interface. Did we solve our initial problem of improving our time to engage support staff? Definitely. That one was solved. We are now onboarding additional use cases as we make the drive to DevOps. xMatters may be used as well to tell the development teams of various release points and trigger points in their DevOps tool chain. So it's one of those things that once you get good at it, it can be used for a variety of things. Are we getting value out of xMatters? I think we're getting tremendous value, and that shows by how many users are in the system, how many engagements are happening, and typically that number has remained fairly consistent. We seem to be driving right around 150 engagements. Some weekends when there's problems that could go up, but the usage is definitely there, and the value is good on that front. Would I do it differently? Probably not at all, because it's one of those things you have to learn by doing. We didn't have a blueprint that's going to say, this is the 10 steps you need to do to launch xMatters. And it's probably similar to when we launched ServiceNow. You can look at it, but eventually you have to just do it. And xMatters has a lot of opportunities to be transformational. And the one thing I will say is don't try to do everything at once. Pick one or two use cases initially before adding on other use cases. The next slide. So any questions from the audience or the panelists or the people in the UK, Salt Lake City, or San Francisco? Those are the ones I saw.
Yeah, you did. A special shout out. We have a whole bunch of cities in California, Maryland, New York City, Salt Lake City, you're right, Atlanta, Colorado, and we did cross the Atlantic, so we have the UK joining as well. So thank you everybody for telling us where you're from. And we also do have a couple of questions, Mark. So the first is in regards to training. So can you talk a little bit more about your approach to training, mainly because you shared that you have those monthly open houses. So do you do training when it's a new use case, or is it just ongoing for new users? Can you expand on that a little bit?
It's both. Partially, the training's available because as we grow in the number of support groups, you have support group managers that have to know they own this thing, and they got to maintain the schedules, the rosters, and ensure that their staff know that they're on boarded with xMatters. Some of it is to help people understand, can I define more devices? How do I substitute somebody if I'm going on vacation? The training is pretty much for anybody who gets touched by xMatters.
Wonderful. Now another question in the run section, you talked about the ServiceNow xMatters integration, but the sync was initially biweekly and then it changed to dynamic. So can you talk about what it was like to modify that or what the project looked like? Was that easy, difficult? How did you change that sync?
Well, the sync was actual code provided by xMatters, and it's a plugin that xMatters provides, and initially, just for whatever reason, 2 years ago, the plugin didn't have that sort of advanced capability, so it was something we scheduled on a twice-a-week basis. And then we were upgrading ServiceNow, and we knew we needed to revisit or upgrade our sync code as well. And at that time, ServiceNow had released a new plugin and they said this is dynamic. And we worked with technical support to test out every use case, because everybody's support groups are going to be defined a little differently, and everybody's support group owners and supervisors are going to be defined a little differently. And we went through considerable testing with our ServiceNow upgrade. So what happens if we delete a user in ServiceNow? What happens if we delete a group in ServiceNow? What happens if we add a user? What happens if we add a new group? And it passed all our use cases, and when we upgraded ServiceNow, we upgraded that bot or that plugin, and it worked perfectly.
Well, you have 40 years plus of experience in IT, so the next couple of questions appear to be based on your expertise in relation to the presentation. So one of the last things that you shared in your slide deck was about learn by doing. So if you had to point to a use case to start, because you mentioned not boiling the ocean, do you have a recommendation as a good place to start for somebody who sees value, but they don't know what their walk is?
Yeah, I would pick, it really depends on the pain point in your organization. We picked incident management because that was the group that was contacting support staff manually. They were actually, dialing the phone. So there was an immediate benefit there. And it's really, an organization's got to look at, are they incident driven? Or are they DevOps driven? But look at that use case where people are picking up the phone and manually trying to get the right person on the phone. And that's what xMatters is going to bring that value to.
I think that's sound advice. The last question that we have for you today is, you mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation that xMatters had been dropped in your lap, so surprise. And then it slowly became a diamond. What surprised you the most about the before and after, before xMatters and then once you started to use it?
I think and I get a lot of tools dropped in my lap. That seems to be a pattern, along the way. But it was really understanding it. Some of it's learning what the tool can do, its capabilities, how to work with the xMatters organization, the support staff, the consulting services. It's on our side, we realized we needed to have some documents. We didn't have anything. We didn't have anything we can point to that says this is what xMatters is, this is how you use it. And so, we needed a library on our side of knowledge articles, which we refer to. They're stored in ServiceNow, so that people who have a question can look it up. We just had to create some standards and build up momentum. Otherwise, it was just a tool that everybody heard about. It's calling me, and I don't know what it is.
That's helpful. Education being key. Well, I know we're at the bottom of the hour, so the good news for all of you, again, thank you for joining, but we can also keep the conversation going on Slack. So at flowlive.slack.com, and that link will be dropped into the chat as well, you can continue the conversation. So Mark has agreed to join us on that, and any questions or comments that weren't addressed here in the time frame allowed, Mark's going to be on the Meet the Speaker channel for another roughly 15 minutes. So we can continue the conversation there. We would love for you to join us. Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing the Freddie Mac story, for your story, and being with us. And for those of you who might need to drop off, know that there's always more information to be found at xmatters.com and also on our YouTube channel. So this presentation is going to be part of the playlist, but there's also training and knowledge and demos and other customer conversations that you might find very useful and interesting. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you on the Slack channel, flowlive.slack.com, and meet the speaker channel. You have a great day.